Thank you very much for coming here. I appreciate your willingness to interview me for this podcast. I am framing the podcast around events in my life or connections that sort of touch subjects that are connected to who I am and what I do and things I believe in. And I thought, what better person is there to connect to when talking about vintage? And recently, Kylie wearing the slinky dress that she bought from you made me think, oh my God, it's Gerard. Of course it is. So thank you so much for coming.
Of course.
And I will introduce this talking about your bio, so we'll have the full scoop. And what comes around goes around. Celebrated its anniversary last year, and that's really fantastic. So thank you very much, and I look forward to doing this with you.
Yeah, well, I thank you for thinking of me. I mean, as I said, it's a pleasure, it's an honor. You're an inspiration, both on a fashion side and as an individual, and everything you've done and what you believe in. So it was really it's a special thing for me. So very happy to do this.
Great. Okay, I'm ready.
Okay.
So what are some questions that you might want to ask?
So of course I know some of your history, but it's interesting, and I guess I can now, from having 25 years in the business and in life, and just some perspectives of even how things have evolved and changed. Or some things that have kind of been the DNA from your vision in the beginning. But I guess from the inception, how did you really come about, your love for fashion, your love for starting your collections, and really, kind of your inspiration was, I guess, first and foremost.
Well, I think I remember vintage films having an incredible impact excuse me, on what I interpreted as beautiful. And I know in my mother's generation, film was the way you saw how you could wear your hair, or what makeup and style. It was more that than magazines. And so I learned my love for film, especially vintage film, through her and her sort of interest in that. And she had all the gestures that those films had. She had developed all of them and made them her own. So she was quite a character in that sort of vintagey look. And I loved spending hours trying to do the makeup and doing my hair. My mother was a hairdresser in her younger years, and so she could do all of these great hairdos. So I would promise to do the dishes and the ironing if she would do my hair, and we would struggle with each other on it. But I started to wear vintage before it was a thing. And this was during Mad Men time. This was early 60s. So people weren't wearing vintage.
No.
Clearly, that was not in the mindset. And I remember finding a vintage place, and I can't even remember the name of it. It was on 13th Street. And you had to go downstairs, and I was obsessed with it. And I would buy these things that I saw in the films and just lived in them, loved them. So then fast forward going to FIT, and I wore less of the vintage because I was so out of step as it was wearing those clothes that I sort of developed my own style, but the girls at FIT were all wearing Mad Men-y kind of things.
Sure.
And then
And was that I mean, it's interesting when you think of Mad Men, because I feel like there's the earlier part of it. I'm trying to think, specific years, but then it got to a little more, it was pushing the bar a little bit, and
So-
the mini skirts,
Well, but mini skirts didn't come yet.
right?
No.
Yeah.
So the early 60s were Mad Men.
Yeah.
It was corsets, cone bras, girdles, fitted or flared skirts. And, I wore those things too, because that's or you wear a sweater with a flared skirt, petticoats. I wore petticoats, I remember, to 6th grade, and I had so many petticoats on, and I would starch them. So when I walked between the desks, they would just go bup, 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 like, and with white bucks that I would powder white. And so there were things that you did, or slingbacks with big taps on them that you'd walk down the street and it would make a tap like tap dancer sound. And so when you and all of your girlfriends wore the same clothes and the taps walking down the street, it was quite the sound. So clothes were always a fun expression, and I think I became sort of a leader in my friends, not because I was wearing something different, but I would wear it in a different way. I would come up with some kind of thing to put in my ponytail, or some way to wear my collar on my shirt or something. And I noticed that people would copy. I would do it because this is my way, and then they would copy what I was doing, and I would find that fascinating, and I would try something else, and then they would copy that. And I thought, oh, there's something going on here. There's something about this. So I was aware of it. I never verbalized it, but there was a consciousness about what I had no problem doing.
It was very natural for you.
I loved it. And,
let me do this again.
Yeah. And so I would keep trying things and experimenting. So fashion, especially at the time when you were a teenager, it was the 50s and early 60s. And then by the time I went to FIT, they were very serious. They would be very coordinated, hats, shoes, gloves, handbags, everything matching. And I didn't feel that. Yeah. And I like to paint, so I always looked like I was halfway between a paint studio and dressed. Yeah. So I wasn't really in sync with everybody at FIT.
Yeah, I would imagine. Well, that was the beauty of it.
Yeah.
So that was the spark. And then, where you really kind of transitioned to thinking, hey, this is maybe, the business. I want to look at this and venture into a business. Like, how was that transition? Or, how did that kind of spark? Because it's always a big deal, to make a leap.
So I was just traveling a lot because I was working at the airlines and in the office, and I would go to London every weekend and bring back clothes, and there were no short skirts. There were no skirts above the knee happening. Before, at that time, not happening. And so the idea of coming back from London, where a percentage of the population were starting to wear mini skirts, and then bringing them back here and wearing mini skirts, it was so provocative, and it caused a stir. And so I brought back so many clothes for friends that I decided I'm going to open a business. And I opened a business with my ex-husband, and I brought clothes back, and I thought that would be it. But then I felt, oh,
And in a sense, meaning was that more, was it new, kind of new product that you were bringing, or more from vintage that you were bringing?
mostly new product. And it was the first time I saw vintage in a way that was part of what the choices were that you could wear. I looked at vintage. I was like, my idea of vintage and was these old movies, and I want to replicate that, 30s and 40s. But here was Antiquarius on Kings Road, and just filled with magical Victorian that you wouldn't really get in New York, and great stuff. And so it was beyond the 30s and 40s. It was really, you could even go back further. And so I would buy some of those things, not a lot, but I bought a ton of Biba, a ton of Bus Stop, and any other kind of designs that were so cool. It could be hats or boots or things like that.
Was Ozzie Clark in play?
Ozzie Clark. Ozzie Clark was small and more expensive. So I really focused more on the energy that Biba and Bus Stop and these other, because it was fast fashion. I would buy the dresses for $12 and sell them for $24.
Yeah, so it was all very palatable.
And so they come and go. And then I decided somewhere along the line that I definitely had some ideas that I didn't see anywhere that I wanted to do. And I just started making them. And all of a sudden I was getting press on the things I was making. And I was shocked, quite frankly, that I didn't know what I was doing and how could anybody even pay for it, never mind give me a press credit. But it was very encouraging, and that kind of thing is very helpful for young people in a world they know nothing about.
Well, it gives you a confidence
that there's maybe a chance to make more of this and to keep going when you're starving and not sure if you're going to be in business the next day.
But those are also the times the real passion coming out too. I think those are those are the most special times in a sense, which I'm sure you were feeling at that time.
Yeah.
And then was it a store that you actually had, which you first took on? I don't know.
So on 53rd Street, between 2nd and 3rd, there were a row, and there still are, a row of brownstones. And each of them were painted different colors. And so there was a parlor floor and a basement. And so I took a basement store for $285 a month. And I painted the floors. I found snakeskin wallpaper and, believe it or not, Salvation Army. And all of these
those are the real finds back then.
fixtures and these cabinets. And so I decorated it from the Salvation Army for practically nothing.
Amazing.
And I remember painting the pattern on the floor and opened. So I calculated I had to make sure I covered the rent and the expenses. So I had my salary from the airline, and I would shop with that money and money that people gave me. And then finally, when we had the store, I would know that certain people would want certain things, and I sort of calculated how much I had to buy, then how much I had to sell, and early training on how do you keep paying the rent. How do you budget and
keep, not overbuy fabric, not overproduce,
how do you keep paying
not
the rent?
Underestimate, So you were still working at the airline at that point and kind of leveraging.
Absolutely, 4 years, and my husband was going to school at the time, so he would work in the store during the day, went to school at night. I worked the early shift till 2 o'clock at the airline, and then I would come to the sample room until like midnight or after make clothes.
Incredible. Wow.
Do what and realizing that, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening, that this is actually a dream that I didn't even dream that's being sort of put into my world. And I was so grateful that I didn't want to waste a minute of it.
Yeah, well, it was another one of those steps that just keeps fueling you and keep going and going, and just having that positive response and, people, just.
I'm sure you've had it too. Like you see all of a sudden people are responding and your business could even be bad. But oh my God, they're responding to this. We're going to make it work. We'll figure out a way to get to the next step. We're going to survive another month. And then all of a sudden something happens and decisions you made to keep and hang in there come together. And how many times does that happen in forever, over and over?
I mean,
over and over.
I can only imagine for you because I know from it's not even the chapters, it's those moments where you're like, somehow that save just came, and it's not a save, but with that passion and what you're putting into it, somewhere those things are supposed to happen.
Yeah.
They are. Because it's plenty of times up against the wall.
Well,
and sometimes that's when the best work gets done.
50 years worth of. So in the beauty of inexperience is you think everything's great all the time. Yeah. And that bad things don't really happen. They happen to other people. And then you realize, oh, bad things can happen to me. But then you realize, oh, this can happen. You can have good, then it can be bad, then it can be good, then it can be bad. That it's never, even with more experience, it's never always good. So the fantasy of Instagram and everything we know is that everything is good and everything is great. But so not true. And the getting through those, so what are those positive things that get you through? Well, people appreciation or some moment that you have yourself where you realize you've just gone to another level. Something happened that took you to the next level. There are things that keep that passion. And when you're blessed leading a creative life and that you have something that's very special for you, the passion is there. And even when you think, I don't know, and then all of a sudden, I'm not letting go of this. This is too good.
Yeah. Well, I think it is true when people say, you kind of have to go through certain experience to really learn and take something from that. And you really do bring that to that next phase and, part of your life and business. I feel like it is life. Isn't that, and, it's interesting. The one thing I was kind of thinking, because as creatives, so much is about, it's that design, it's that vision. But, when you think about what it really means to run a business, and, a lot of my thinking was, I think you're just so unique in the sense, especially during the time when you're starting, it was really about the houses, all the fashion houses and pretty structured that way. You kind of laid your own road, and from the aspect of going from a creative standpoint to really a command of business, how was that balance, for you?
Well, the interesting thing was that when I started, designers were not a thing. It was the store and what the store sold. I think John Fairchild brought the concept through Yves Saint Laurent to what a designer is and what a design house is. Norman Norell was obviously a famous American designer. There were other American designers that were well known, but they were in a very elite group that sold to the socialites. Mm-hmm. And socialites were huge. And John Fairchild from Women's Wear Daily really glorified the socialite and her wardrobe and her aesthetic and knowledge of what each of these designers really provided for them. But when he brought over Saint Laurent as an image and a brand, and the concept of a designer.
I'm feeling 70s. I mean,
Yeah.
in that sense.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
basically,
yeah.
yes. I mean,
This is early mid 70s.
Yeah.
And he changed the game. And the idea of designers started to formulate. So Halston, Calvin Klein, Ralph Lauren, all of these names now were the American,
Bill Glass, I guess.
the American designer of the people, right? These were the designers of our time. And this was the beginning of American design, not the elitist kind, but American democratic design. It didn't mean it was cheap, it didn't mean it was for everybody, but it was accessible, and the designers became celebrity. And so the perfect place for them was Studio 54. The perfect notoriety, and Page Six never existed before, and now Page Six existed, and this was a platform just like Instagram for them to be seen,
Sure.
and to be socialized
And express themselves.
and so did the clothes. So even for me, while I never went to Studio 54, even though everybody is sure they saw me there, my clothes were there, and my sort of credibility as a designer started to get stamped in place, because so many of the people were wearing clothes that I designed, and obviously it was about dancing, and I dance, and my clothes for dancers and movement is what I do. So I was a fit for that. But Halston had an entourage of celebrities like Liza and that whole group that wore his clothes, and Calvin had his following, and Ralph was presenting this brand concept brilliantly. And so
That's funny, where you don't see per se Ralph fitting in there, but Ralph was obviously pioneering, I guess, at that point.
pioneering,
Right?
majorly pioneering. And so this was a high point in American design, and Ian and I really look at that and say, for American design, that was probably the highest point.
Yeah.
For the spirit of the originality, the concept of what fashion can be for the American market, in so many ways, and mostly the creativity was at its real peak. Not that beautiful clothes haven't been made since, but the original concepts were there.
Right.
The original germ of the idea was there, and then maybe used in other ways in other decades.
Well, you had people just pushing the bar, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like full expression of, you can do anything there, right? I mean, it was fully about the statement at that point. I mean,
And the 70s were also about that, because, and I've talked about this before, you had a very strong feminist movement, very strong. You had Helen Gurley Brown with Cosmo telling every woman about how many orgasms they could have, and like, what the hell is an orgasm? And then men coming out in a world where nobody was gay, and then all of a sudden, wow, look at this. And so many people feeling claustrophobic in their hometown, and their identities feeling threatened in the hometown, coming to New York during a time when it was bankrupt and affordable, but dangerous as hell.
Sure.
So all of this creativity was festering here.
Yeah.
And the expression from the department store windows to every creative thing you could think of, from home design, furniture, film, music, everything. The music here, the clubs, the bands, all of that. There was so much going on that the energy and the mix at the time had all the right ingredients. And I will say today is a very parallel time. I think what's going on politically, internationally, the energy, what's happening in Paris, everywhere, there's so much that's the same, that this energy about clothes and the way people wear them and gender fluidity and all of that is really coming to be present again, which I find very exciting.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's great to see. I mean, it's sad to see some of the barriers rub against, but it's good to see that people are pushing it, which is, yeah.
Well, and so how does, this whole gender fluid thing was very obvious for me in the 70s when men were 50% of my customer, and I've always made women's clothes, and they looked great in the clothes, and it wasn't drag, it was just wearing clothes they loved. And I'm seeing it now, and I have great photos of guys wearing my clothes, from musicians to just people on the street to, editorials that are off the charts. And I am so excited about it. So how do you see it manifesting and what goes around?
Well, I have to say it's interesting because you triggered something going back to like our beginnings. So we started in '93, and I guess for Seth and I, we had our own version where, and it was really similar in the sense where we were just kind of wearing vintage, buying vintage, going through the vintage shops. And again, at that point, of course, they existed, but it was still like Andy's Cheapies, Family Jewels, Cheap Jacks, a bunch of these spots. And we were basically extracting these really cool pieces and doing the same, going out to the hot spots of the early 90s. And people were like, where are you getting this stuff? And we were out like 5-6 nights a week. And, it was again, that kind of affirmation, confirmation where it's like, hey, we got something here. Like, this is really unique. Right. And then fast forward for our 1 year anniversary, we actually did a fashion show at Webster Hall with Joey Arias actually emceeing the show. And it was a combination of like, some of our models, some of our friends, some, drag. And it was this like kind of, Webster Hall at that point. And it was really, really similar. So that was now early 90s. And to your point, we see that now. There's definitely that aspect. And, our clientele, we have such a broad range. And I feel like that's what's great in terms of even down to our staff and the openness and the comfortability, whether it's a celebrity, whether it's any gender, whether it's any age, we're just, we're passionate about what we love, and the people who gravitate and kind of want to have a taste of that or be a part of that, we're so willing to give, and it's what we love, so for us it's a definite part of our DNA and an element of that for sure.
Yeah. It's very interesting for me to see the cycle. We talk about sustainability, and there's nothing more sustainable than vintage clothing, because it just keeps having another life, and that's what really clothes should be about. Nothing disposable, or you throw away, or you cut up, or whatever it is. The fact that this piece of clothing that maybe I've made in the 70s then is worn or given away to somebody else, or finds its way to a vintage store, and then somebody gets that, and then they pass it on to their daughter. And so it keeps living a new life. It keeps having an experience with the wearer, and it's really fascinating because there's so many stories in everybody's experience with a piece of clothing, as I'm sure you've heard. And I've heard a million stories, like I wore this and this, where I met my husband, or there's unbelievable stories, and they're wonderful. And I remember seeing this girl wearing this skirt that was the very first skirt I ever made, the very first item I ever made, and it was maybe like 15 years ago. And this young girl, blonde, it was a sunny day, and she was really cute, and she's walking along, and I see the skirt, and I think, what an amazing skirt. That is so beautiful. Look at the way it moves. And it was, I think, some very soft suede, and I didn't know how to sew, so it was all whip stitched. And I had all these sections and pieces and
kind of patchworked in a sense.
Well, it was more of like pieces and stitched and whatever. And as she walked by me, my heart skipped a beat, and I thought, oh my God, that's my skirt. And I wanted to say something to her, but I thought, she probably doesn't even know who Norma Kamali is. And it's probably, she either got it at a vintage store, or her mother had it, or it's got some history. But it just made me feel so good that skirt, which meant so much to me, because it was like the first thing I ever made with my own hands, before I could use a sewing machine, and here it was still being used.
It's incredible.
No, it's fabulous, right?
I'm surprised you didn't say anything.
When I see people wearing my sleeping bag coat or something like that, I would never say anything. If they recognize me, they may smile and say something, but I would never do that. And you bought it, you don't have to own me.
Right.
You don't have to have me stalking you in it.
Well, meanwhile, everybody would love it, I'm sure. But I was gonna kind of even go back with it in regard to the sustainability. I mean, it's, now it's obviously so at the forefront, and I've been speaking of late where, when we did start the business, it was literally a pitch and a sale just to get people in the headset that they could actually wear something that's secondhand and pre-owned.
Somebody else wore.
Period. Just so you get them in the door and they're like, what's going on in here? And, that was like, it's been, and then it's like, you'd almost have to go through a process and coaxing them and then get into the process. Now, really the whole sector, and again, there's obviously a huge difference where it's the vintage element and, let's just say, resale, and pre-owned. But whichever side, the sustainability aspect is, completely in effect. And I don't want to say it's worked into the advantage, but truthfully, of course, it's a great thing for what it's doing in the circular economy. And I think also the fact now where people are actually looking at something and saying, on a new side, I'm going to buy this with the knowledge that, hey, you know what? I may wear it a couple of times, and there is a venue or a place out there in the market, and it's like, it's goodwill, it's everything, where that can then be, moved on, get some money off the board and kind of roll into that. And I think it's just a
recycle, reuse. And, And the interesting thing about, and it's not all vintage, because there was a lot of crap that was made and that nobody wants. Completely. Even though sometimes the crap, I'll see a period that was really off and that didn't really click. And, as you looked at it while it was happening, you knew it wasn't clicking. And then after, it was like, oh, thank God that passed. And then all of a sudden now, everybody loves it now, thinking that everybody loved it then, but they didn't. And so it's very funny to see that. But to see that the appreciation for certain kinds of vintage as an art form too, is really gratifying, because fashion is a very peculiar art form, but it's an art form you can experience physically. And art is beautiful, and film is beautiful, and music is beautiful, and it can surround you and envelop you and have an emotional effect on you. But clothes are touching your skin.
Yeah.
You're feeling them.
Yeah, they exude.
You're expressing yourself through them. You're exchanging an experience with them. People are identifying you through them in many cases, and you're identifying yourself through them. Yeah. So while it may not be an official art form, it is, I've learned to appreciate how meaningful a piece of fabric on the skin that is a style that makes you feel good has on long-term memory, on the moment, on the how you feel, your self-esteem, all of those things. So while music can make you dance and make you sing and jump up and down, it's touching you spiritually.
Yeah.
Film, same way. Art, absolutely. Interior design, architecture. And furniture has some of that, where you're in it and you're feeling it. But something that's enveloping your body and is moving with your body, is keeping your body warm, keeping it cool, doing all of those things, helping you walk or run faster, doing all of that, that is powerful. And there was a time in my career where I felt really uncomfortable with the fact that there are people finding a cure for cancer, and I'm worried about a quarter of an inch on a hem. Like, what's up with that, Norma? What is up with you? And I would feel horrible about it. And then I started to really listen to what people were saying when they wore something and how they felt. And I really turned around and I thought, I'm going to appreciate the value of what clothing can do.
Sure. Well, I think that's admirable, and I think one should, because that feeling that it does get, everything that you said, I totally agree. And I love all the arts, and I love being in a beautiful space and that feeling, but to wake up and say, I feel like this, or to be in an event and be like, this is, I think it's I feel exactly the same. I think it's beautiful. It doesn't mean you have to, well, you can care about a cure for cancer. It doesn't mean you can't do both, but as an art and a business, it's what you do, and so, I mean, in regard to even, I guess, that point where you maybe really started to embody that and feel that, do you feel that had any shift of how you approached even your design, and I'm sure your fabrics and, kind of, I think it's incredible, the aesthetic, visual design that you have, but that functionality, that's just, and that versatility, I feel that everything that you've done. Do you feel you've always had that approach? Was there a point where you really got more of a command of that?
Well, I studied anatomy because I wanted to be a painter, and so I was very lucky. I went to a high school in New York that was all girls, and the art department was a very isolated little group of studios, and we had nude models at a New York City public high school. Just think about that. And they were all dancers who would come in and make extra money modeling for the art department. And so I really learned how the body moves, and the 360-degree view of the sculptural form of the human body. And so, as life has it, as the universe took me on my path, I found myself just having all of that experience, so it was easy for me to design a swimsuit. It was easy for me to design clothes that could move with the body, that could feel comfort and could do things. So I sought out knits and stretch early on, before Lycra was even in any clothing. It wasn't 75 is when I started to experiment with. I used to buy girdle fabric for some of my early stretch leggings that nobody was making, mind you, but I would find fabrics and try to get the stretch in them. And for 500 yards of fabric, maybe 375 would be damaged and the rest would be, that's how the early development was. But I was very interested in finding knits and fabrics that moved, and so I worked with them early on so that could be incorporated into the design and how you felt in the clothes. And then I think it was probably 73. Of course, I was obsessed with vintage, and I was selling a lot of vintage. There would be these guys that would come with the biggest trash can bags you ever saw in your life and drag in big bags of vintage, and I would go through them and I'll take this is like how much?
Right out of the rag house.
And or go up to Harlem to warehouses where they had storage of fur coats or whatever that nobody had recovered or went out of business, and the stuff was there, and I would be taking the subway back from Harlem with trash can bags of vintage.
Funny, that's what I did.
Well,
on
so
on 206, 200,
and so
Clemente.
Yeah, so you can, so this was my sort of foray into this, and at the time I thought, why can't I think of vintage of the future? So in 73, I put this challenge in my head to come up with some styles that I felt could exist 40 years from that time, and that would be still viable and still desirable. And so those pieces are still on my line today.
It's just unbelievable.
They're
Incredible.
still on my line. And it's not because I'm trying to prove
hold on
myself
to them, right? Yeah.
It's that
They're
they
genuinely
really work. And the beauty of it is I used knits to do them in. And the fabrics have just gotten better and better and better through the years. So actually, the styles today are 100 times better than the originals, because the original fabric at this point, if you saw it, would be like plastic. It would be very not soft and brittle and not as comfortable because of age.
Yeah, no, I feel even knowing some early pieces, even prior to us, with your archive, like pieces that have come through, and you can kind of feel that completely
different.
Yeah.
Completely different. So there have been a lot of changes in the fabrics, especially fabrics I like, that have really improved the lifespan of a garment, the sustainability of a garment, the wearability of clothing, and that is continuing to change, and it will continue to change.
Sure. Yeah, no, it will. And well, it's interesting because, as we speak from, let's say, the eras and the decades, and you've seen 5 decades of your business, and I think we're at a point when we look at 70s, 80s, the decades are usually pretty depictive, and there's a lot of people that follow trend with that said. In your mind, in terms of trend, I mean, how much of an effect did it even have on you, if any, really? Was it really, I mean, you're kind of creating your own in a sense,
Yeah,
I guess.
I think there are 2 things that I recognize looking back that I had in my favor. One was I decided I could be me and I could do a really good job at that. But I couldn't be other people. So if there was a trend or a hot new designer, and then everybody wanted to do what that hot new designer was doing, I didn't think I could do that as well, and it wasn't fun. I didn't want, that wasn't my idea of fun.
Sure.
Coming up with something that I'd never done before, that I'd never seen before, was far more fun.
Right.
So that was my road. But trends would come and go. Some of those trends reflect a time, a social time, a political time, a feminist time. So if it's a feminist time and nobody's wearing underwear, the construction of the clothing is a little different. So I would be affected by those things just like everybody else, because fashion actually reflects the time in a lot of ways. And so especially women's bodies from decade to decade have changed. That's a big thing that nobody talks about. Sure. So it could be a model that affected the look of a decade, or it could be, or models, or it could be people are working out. Everybody's working out, so they have fit bodies. They're not rail thin and emaciated. They're more full-bodied or firmer, or have even a different way that they wear clothes. So that affects the fit and the look of clothes too. So through the years, there have been these factors that affect what you do. But I think after a few decades or half decades where I've seen designers come in and then go out, I kept thinking, oh my God, that's not good.
Flash in the pants. I don't want that, right?
That was a trend, and people get tired of trends. And then as each decade went by, the trend time reduced and reduced and reduced. So it's like a trend is a year now, if that, and come and go. So the only thing that you can really depend on is authenticity, reflecting the time, being relevant in the time, right? I mean, that's critical, and you want to do that anyway, intuitively, and just making sure that you're as excited as you can be about what you do, and that then sort of people pick up on that when they see the clothes or try them on. So I think that is how you get through the changing of trends and everything else. And so now it's another time of disruption and change and all of this stuff. And I actually flourish in disruption. This is because
it's your sweet spot.
This is like, it's people are open to just give me something different. So my thing is like, don't go too different, because you're going to have to pay for that material.
Sure.
And if you're not selling it, there has to be a nice happy medium here. Sure. So I'm always, if I'm going to go way different and I want to, I make sure I have something that's not so off the cliff, so that there's a something that I love, but still not everything has to be so different. But in a disruptive time, I don't have to control myself as much. I can try different things, and it may not be in the design, but maybe the way you're presenting it, or
could be a print, it could be a colorway, or, just the fact that relevancy. Because I imagine you have, the customers that have been with you for decades, right? I mean, have been, loving what you do, and then the fact of, look where things are, as now we say, to actually, there's the ones who know Norma, and you look now and you say, okay, there's a whole new field, there's a new field of designers out there. I can't even say who they really are. There's things spawning out, and it's like, just to be in touch with it, it's, how do you, how's your approach now? I guess you spoke about it, where you kind of can it's a disruptive time, and you can kind of take some, some risks out there. But, in terms of this next generation, I mean, where do you see this going? And I mean, the relevancy for you to sustain that. I mean, how do you feel about it?
So the interesting thing is that there are women older than I am that have Norma Kamali clothes or have a memory of Norma Kamali. And in a woman's life, there are so many, and because I've been in business so long, I have more decades of customers who have had an experience with me. Some long time experiences, some shorter, and some get married and change their lives completely and would never wear my clothes again until maybe another time in their life, or give their clothes to their daughters or whatever. And so there are people who will say to me, "Oh, are you still making clothes?" And I think, so obviously she's not been sort of in my circle, and I say to them, yes, I've been making clothes, but you've changed your life, and I don't exist in your life, and that's perfectly normal that people go through those cycles. But then there are people who, because of a personality type, connect to certain types of things, whether it's furniture, color, antiques, vintage, design, brands, and they relate in a physiological way. There's some real deep connection, and they probably can't explain it themselves. And those clients, through the years, whether they started in their 20s, 30s, 40s, or whatever, are sort of constants that are very interesting. This generation and the generation that are shopping online, this is a very interesting time because through social media and through e-commerce, I'm reaching a much larger audience than I ever had before.
You had that pulse, it's one of the earliest to have that pulse online.
But now, shopping online gives you the ability to know me through social media, to know me, to communicate with me, and to buy something right away. At any time. It could be 3 o'clock in the morning. It could be on your way to work. You have the opportunity to connect with me or my Instagram posts or whatever you want to say. So just like that dress that Kylie, I'm thinking about Instagram, that Kylie bought from you.
Yeah.
There were tons of pictures in it, and I was so surprised to see it.
Sure.
And I remembered the collection it was in. I remember the whole thing. And then on Instagram, there were reposts, and Norma, do this dress again. You've got to do this dress again. And it was so many requests. So, and it was easy to do that one. I mean, because it was just, that's an easy one to do. And so I said, yes. And they said, do it exactly the same color. And I said, no, I'm not doing it exactly the same color. I'm going to do it in colors I want to do it in now. Yeah. And no, you have to. It was a woven fabric, and it was in this. And I said, no, it wasn't a woven fabric. It was a stretch, and I prefer to do it in this color, this color, this color. And so I challenged the fact that people, like how many people really wanted the dress, or how many people wanted to be Kylie. They wanted her breasts, they wanted her butt, they wanted her skinny waist. What was that about? And so I didn't give in to the kind of
too
thing.
Obvious for you.
And I was like, no, I loved the dress, and I was happy to see it again. But it didn't mean that to me to do it again, to capitalize on Kylie. I just love the dress and do it in the colors I want and the way I wanted to. And then I have a really funny story. So I put the dress up, and this girl is very pissed off on Instagram because how dare you, claiming I copied her.
Oh, gosh.
That's her dress. That's her design. And then I see she writes the same thing about an outfit I did that J-Lo is wearing. And she
I saw the yellow.
and she writes it on that one too. That's my skirt. How dare you? I have it documented. I did it in 2016. Yada. And she's challenging me. So I write a note and I said, be careful. I think it's a good idea if you do a little research. And so now, every 2 seconds, she's writing, and then she's writing texts and emails to me through info.
Oh my gosh.
And very intense. So I look her up, and she's a designer a Welsh designer. And so she wasn't even alive when I first did that dress. She wasn't born when I did that. And I thought, is this something that sort of the nature of people now, where they assume that there was no past? Or do you know what I mean? Like, what can that be? And I sent her a note saying, you know, I'm sorry that you're so distressed and you're feeling so angry about this, but I actually did it on this time. And I feel the same way you do about people copying.
Yeah.
In fact, it's made me very angry many times. But you have to understand, first of all, that you need to know what's going on before you get angry.
An accusation.
Yeah. And
when it's really that she probably sounds like she copied you.
She probably didn't copy me. She probably sort of was influenced by a copy of something I did, and doesn't even understand the kind of the distance reference to it. But it's sort of the awareness, the point I'm getting to too, is the awareness of what was the original. So we talked about the 70s and that was a very original time, a very first time, 60s, first time. So where do the originals come from? Like, is this this must be something you think about yourself. Like, what was the original and what is the derivative of the original?
I mean, my gosh, the inspirations, you know, I mean, you feel like there's always, well, I shouldn't say there's always, but most of the time there is some cue or something that is taken. I mean, and I think a majority of people are more on, you know, it's the trend and whatnot, but I mean, real core designers like yourself, where you're thinking from a totally different perspective, you know, it's not that you're looking to copy something, or you get, you know, I mean, it's an attitude, it's a you know, a point of view that you have, as you discussed. You know, for us, I mean, we see it all throughout the market. I mean, you know, from Victorian, you know, up through current, you know, I feel like we've seen almost everything on the planet.
Right.
And, you know, one says it's almost impossible to recreate, but as you said, with fabrications, you know, and I think certain applications, there are some, you know, new and innovative, you know, pieces coming out at this point, which I think is really interesting. You know, and how you bridge the functionality to, you know, to style and kind of pushing that envelope, and the sustainability aspect. You know, it's a very interesting point right now where all those kind of things combined. But yeah, I mean, for us, we've kind of seen the whole gamut, you know, in terms of.
So I was just in Los Angeles, and New York has always been here with fashion, and Los Angeles here. And with all of the consciousness that New York designers and European designers have been looking at to incorporate into their businesses and their designs, the sensibility and the power of what Los Angeles had was that they've always had this sort of ethic about sustainability, product, and made that a part of what their fashion is. And so this scale is sort of going here. They're not the same, but the scale is sort of going here. And fashion is having many identities. So I have a question for you. What do you see from today and all of these topics? What do you see as the vintage of the future?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because I will say I do want to touch on the aspect where I even feel now where there's, let's say it's going back to the 90s, and early 2000s, to me there was a lot of not so great fabrics that were in play. And I actually see some of that in play now, which I'm just like, oh my God, I can't believe. I mean, with the aspect of streetwear and just, I'm seeing poly in the mix and just some of these and I'm like, I can't believe this is $1,500. This is $2,500 for these fabrications, and and there's so much fast fashion, right now. I mean, it's just like quick fashion. It's disposable.
That's why I'm asking you because
it's kind of scary to think what's ahead. Really. I mean, and and then there's the more customized designers where you say, hey, there's more. It's maybe limited runs and whatnot, but are you really going to be seeing that? How much is going to be left? How much was made? I do. For us also, when we looked at the eras, it was and when we opened, it was all Victorian through 60s, maybe a little touch of 70s. And as we went through, we then eventually crept up to the 80s, and then really 90s. It started becoming more about the brands, which and kind of the houses, and now where we look at between Chanel and, at least from a luxury accessory standpoint, Chanel, Louis, and Hermes is kind of the top core, but, for us, when we look at Azzedine Alaïa in the day and Saint Laurent, when we look at some of the Japanese designers like Comme and Miyake, and Vivienne Westwood on the English side. These are just the classics that I feel like will always sustain an aspect. But, in some sense, it's a lot of these are designers that this generation may eventually not even know. I feel like when I talk about Cardin and Courrèges and, some of those, they look at you like you have two heads, So, I do think there's an aspect, now Carl's, passed sadly, but I think still something like Chanel, the house is still going to thrive, and certain brands are going to have that. But I actually, something that I've been thinking about a lot, and where you have, let's say, your top brands, and now you see a lot of shifts and changes within creative directors at a lot of the houses, and it's almost a little bit sad because I feel like there's not enough room out there for all the houses to flourish at the same time. And I wanted to see what you thought about that too, because it's, what do you think on that? It's
I just think because of the disruption and the ability to sustain the numbers and the volume and the finances of these huge companies, their expenses are enormous. Yeah. And so how do they do it? So if the numbers aren't making it, next? Who's next?
I know.
And that obviously is not the answer. So I think fashion designers are disposable right now too. Yeah. Anybody can be a designer. Anybody. When Ian interviewed me for the podcast, one of the questions he asked was, what do you think about these non-designers, celebrities, with these fashion brands. I mean, it's outrageous. They are not trained, but that's not what it's about. It's totally about followers and having an influence over an audience. And so, to me, it sort of makes sense to take a look at an industry that didn't really have famous designers until the 70s,
Right.
until John Fairchild elevated the designer, and come around and take a look at it again and say, so if you have all this training and you have this skill set, guess what? Anybody can be a designer.
Well,
Anybody can be a designer. You can have a technical team in place, and anybody who has a point of view and an audience is as powerful as the next person. But maybe the designer's time is coming to a phase out, and unless you have a real authentic connection to an audience, a social media audience or an audience like that, you really may not need to have that person as a designer. So if that person is connected, then there's a business opportunity. And the Kardashians have taught everybody a big lesson about life and times in this world, and they skillfully are brilliantly achieving these goals. None of them were trained for design or for beauty or anything, but you know what? They have a point of view. They have very good leadership with their mother,
with their mom, yeah.
and
Incredible.
they know how to execute authenticity. They are being their authentic selves, and they're finding people like them, that following them, and they're transforming people who are not like them to be like them, because people need somebody to follow. So I think you have to really appreciate the power of reaching a global audience and connecting to people on an intimate, this is an intimate friend. This is a friend that we touch and hold more than we do our best friends,
Yeah.
more than we do our partners. We are intimately involved with this machine, and that is really more important. So the lifespan of a designer right now, I'm not sure. And so when I started, there weren't designers.
No.
There were products, and there was creativity that I find very special right now. So I don't have a problem with not having fame as a designer.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have that problem at all. And I think for you, the interesting thing that will happen, it may not be the houses,
No.
right? It may not be luxury.
No.
It may evolve into something else
Sure.
that you will intuitively pick up on
Gravitate
as we
towards,
go
yeah.
through this process. And keeping in mind, sustainability is going to be a loud sound over everything. Keeping in mind all of the new awareness is going to be very present, and that gender fluid is more important.
Yeah.
And what are people feeling they want to do to express themselves? So maybe there will be less of the stylists per se, and maybe more of those stylists will become the designer replacements, and then people will shop for themselves.
Yeah.
And a new kind of thing will happen. I believe that vintage, or the kind of thing you sell, is not going anywhere, because there are very few experiences people have in the shopping experience. that bring in the entertainment factor that vintage does. So for example, the only thing, when I got rid of everything, the only thing I kept, because I do nothing with right now, but I want to do something with it, was a collection of costume jewelry that is all from old films. And it's wonderful, and it's massive, and I have bins and bins and bins of it.
Oh my gosh.
And what's great about it is each piece has a story. Each piece has an entertainment possibility of who wore it in a film, or what the designer, like Joseph of Hollywood and all of those designers that did this incredible costume jewelry produced. So there's storytelling, there's entertainment, there's a connection with history, and all of that. Even if you never saw the film or it didn't matter to you, the pieces are so extraordinary. They're museum quality, but they're still wearable because they're not precious. They're costume jewelry. So I look at that kind of thing. I look at what you do, and I look at what the retail experience is, and I'm not sure what that word will be. And I see it encapsulated in VR, in visceral experiences. And what you've created is a visceral experience. And I'm sure you see that every day. So people are not going to keep going to see you, because it's like going to a museum, but they can participate.
Yeah, that's very inviting and comfortable. Yeah, it may initially feel intimidating, but then you realize, oh wow, this is so inviting. And I think that whole experience, from the space to the curation, and each store having a different curation, to embedding your staff with knowledge, and just that real, true customer service that I think we all agree is like a lost art at this point.
And it's something you can't really appreciate in the same way online. So if what you do can be duplicated online with faster service, better, all of that, gets your house overnight, same day, whatever.
No, that version of great service on that part,
So this is what you have is better in person than doing it that way, unless there's a continuity of experience. But more and more, the kind of thing you do and other things that involve a connection with another human being, I think is what the future is about. So vintage will obviously morph and keep changing and evolving, but the experience is so delightful and exciting.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you're saying that and appreciate it, because that's what we're, right now retail, brick and mortar was the beginning of our business, and now we're really forging into our e-com and, with social media and, kind of having, I'll call it transparency of inventory, because the thing for us is we don't have the piece where, this piece hits like Kylie's wearing it. You got the one piece, and sure, we did our line for, about 7-8 years, and it was good to kind of have us on the map as more of a brand in that way. But obviously we really went back. That was 2006 to 2013. But then we just said, you know what, we're going to put our efforts into just being the best, vintage / pre-owned luxury, like on the planet. Like that's really our mission in every way, from the curation of the product to the experience to the service. And right now where you can come into the store, the idea is to really have, like, whether it's on, iPads or whatnot, but to really have all of our stores inventory, and even from our headquarters.
That you could just flick through.
Where you can just come through and say, hey, I want to see all of your Chanel boucle blazers. There's 200 in stock.
Yeah.
Or I want to see all your, pink Chanel bags, or all your Alaya dresses, or whatever it is. And, so we're working towards those aspects, so we could really be leveraging on both sides.
Right.
And the other key thing, I think, and you have to possess this, is like you never stand on your laurels like this is, we're not open to learning and to, kind of testing new waters. I think we're very open-minded, Seth and I, and the team below us, to be open to what that next thing is. And you know, for us, we can be really reactionary. That's the great thing on vintage. And it's not to say, oh, this trend is in, so let's get it. But you know, we feel it. I mean, we're a part of creating the trend and kind of pushing things out there a little earlier, because that's what we believe in, that's what we see. And really our clientele at the top level, I mean, we really have all the tastemakers. I mean, the reason they come to us is because they're going to get that one-of-a-kind piece that no one else is going to have.
And it's totally about one-of-a-kind.
And it is. And, you know, it could be from a beat-up pair of Levi's, you know, with a rock tee and a Chanel bag, to this incredible Valentino or, you know, Dior Galliano gown, you know, and it's like, you know, and we feel it's broad, but it's focused. You know, we know what we like and don't like. You know, there's I feel for us, the best of each of the designers, we know those moments, we know those pieces, we know the ones we don't want. You know, so for us, I think how we put that package together, it's special. And believe me, like looking at the retail landscape coming forward, like who knows? I mean, and I look even beyond fashion. You know, what's going to happen? I mean, is there, you know, you got Uber Eats and Seamless, you know, and for restaurants, you know, it's like you need to have that great experience to want to go out and go to dinner. Do you need to go into, otherwise you'll be like, you know, I'll order in.
Stay home.
You know, stay home. And so I don't know what's going to happen out there, but it's, you know.
Well, you know, that's why we love disruption. It's a time to really change, but you have the advantage and in what you're doing, and it's great, and congratulations. And I'm so happy we've done work together, and I'm really thrilled that you came to do this today. I enjoyed the conversation. I hope other people do too.
Myself as well. Thank you so much for having me do this, and look forward to things in the future, as always.
Thank you.
Thanks, Norma.